start. Let's go.
All right. Merry Christmas, everybody. Welcome to Barbershop Talk. On behalf of our director, Andre Crockett, the man, the leader. We got Bud here, who's manning the cameras here today. You need to stick his face in. We even got Gil here. He's about to hook up some cuts. And we have Walter Smith here from the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage today. But before we jump into that, this is Barbershop Talk. We are about community. We're about the at-risk community. We're about the African-American community. I'm hitting them all. We're about the whole community. Those voices that are not heard. When we all do better, when we all do better, as Paul Wellstone said, and that's what this whole effort is about. So thank you for tuning in today. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everybody. But as we go into 2019, I also want to let you know, if you want to help us out here as we go and grow in 2019, let us know. This is about the community, making our community better here in South Minnesota. We want you to be involved. If you're interested in questions here today for Walter or any of us, make sure you hit Bud Whitehorn on Facebook with your questions if you have any questions while our show is going on today. So thank you for tuning in. I know a lot of you are out there doing your shopping, getting ready for the holidays and all that. Be careful out there, but make sure you have a Merry Christmas, because Jesus is the reason for the season.
Amen. Amen.
So as we get in, we're going to do our white elephant segment here, and I brought this segment in when the director wasn't here, so he'll probably ixnay next year.
That's the fire.
The elephant turned white this week. I thought it was just the elephant. Now it's the white elephant now.
That's the real elephant in the room that I won't be here next time. Okay, so we got a couple of things here today, or three things. One is, this is the elephant in the room, particularly here in South Minnesota, where we don't have a lot of diversity, or we're growing in diversity. I was at a training 4 weeks ago, and it was a cultural competency training. We're talking about Thanksgiving food, actually, around Thanksgiving. And the subject of pie came up, and I said, I haven't had sweet potato pie for a long time, given I lived here and my family was back in Indianapolis. And I said I had pumpkin pie. They looked at me like I was crazy. So my question to you all is, come on now, am I a sellout if I eat pumpkin pie on the holidays rather than sweet potato pie? Oh, I didn't tell you we have Gil here today too. He cut to me. I think I said. But am I a sellout?
Brother Reverend, well, no, you are not a sellout. Really good question to start off, because one of the things I think I'm supposed to do, life purpose, is about dealing with the pathology of our people.
Right on.
And we tend to be studied like lab rats by most of our counterparts in society. And I don't mean counterparts as if we're one against the other. It's just that as a people, we're deeply rich with heritage and tradition, and we're trendsetters as people.
Right.
So when you ask a question like that, I actually had a similar question asked when I was in the military about barbecue sauce on chicken. It was just the strangest question I'd ever heard in my life, but it's because there's always a fear, I think, of us being who we are,
right,
and then the other party not being able to define us. So you eating pumpkin pie, messing with somebody who's used to us saying.
And by the way, I should highlight the story. These are some sisters that squared me.
Oh, these are sisters.
Sisters said I was ranked. I was less than African American. We were joking about it, of course.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad you were joking, because I've actually had some real encounters. Where people were offended that that I did something outside the prescribed black box. This is black.
So I'm not a sellout.
No, you're not a sellout.
Yeah, sellout. I mean, I don't have a story like that, Donnie.
There you go.
Because you know I'm certified. I'm 100% get no. But I thought about it. Look, I didn't know for a long time. I want people to think I'm ignorant, but I didn't know black people eat dip. You know what I mean? Talking about nacho dip, all that type of dips.
Dips and chips.
I got here, some people put some dips. It took me years. It took me years to start, talking about different stuff. We went to corner stores and all that type of stuff. So we got,
we poured it right on the chips.
Chicken, we didn't get all that stuff.
Yeah, we poured it right on the chips. We ain't dip it.
I realized one day I tried it. One day I tried something new. Man, now I'm dipping everything. I'm dipping everything. But I understand what you're saying, Donnie. I haven't broke down to the pumpkin pie.
You
yet.
haven't? See, he's authentic.
I've been fortunate.
This is a real African-American brother.
I've been fortunate in my church to have some old ladies who take care of me. and give me sweet potato pie. But since Donnie said it, if y'all out there, we got a brother right here who got a taste for pumpkin pie. Hey, if I was home in Indianapolis, my mom makes like 8 of them, right? She takes them to work and all that. But, you know, I'm 8 hours away, man. I can't get mine. So how did it taste? How did the pumpkin pie taste?
Less than sweet potato, I'll tell you that. You know, it's
not the same thing.
Texture.
It ain't as rich.
It's not as rich.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably didn't have no butter in it.
See, y'all tripping, man. See, I know y'all get the pumpkin
No, I
pie.
don't ask that question because we didn't have, I didn't see no pumpkins when I grew up at.
Right, none of those in the hood. They didn't have no pumpkin patches over in the corner.
No, we had all that.
You gotta
stuff
go to the
down.
suburbs to get all that. You gotta get to the suburbs.
Okay. Okay, next topic. Monday, Kevin Durant.
He started it.
He passes Larry Bird for 33rd on the all-time scoring list. Larry Bird, 80s. The Great White Hope, as they call him. You young people, I don't know if you can see this. This is Larry Bird. Oh, here's a young person right here. You need to see that. My question is, I still have Larry Bird in my top 6 all time. Was he as good as he was? Was he the Great White Hope? Boston Celtics. And since you are a Maryland scoring champion, you would know.
I know. I give credit where credit's due. You know, I hear from the legends. You know, Magic, Isaiah. You know what I'm saying? They said Larry Bird could play.
Yeah.
Especially because he didn't have a lot of athleticism.
Right.
His IQ was very high.
Right.
Not only that, but he was a competitor.
Right.
A competitor. You know what I'm talking about?
Right.
And you really look at that. Makes a big difference when you look at someone who's a legend.
Right. Right.
I mean, he had to overcome a lot of different obstacles. You know.
Right.
I mean, he lived up.
Right.
To his reputation.
Yeah.
You know, he lived up to the hype.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, he
talk
showed
crazy
up.
out
He
there.
showed up.
Right.
You know, and plus he played basketball at a time when it was totally different to today.
Yes.
You can hand check, you know what I'm talking about? It was it was aggressive, you know what I'm talking about? You go to the hole, you guaranteed to get hit. You know, so you could if you didn't like to be touched, you couldn't play back then.
So where's it in your top 10?
Well, I don't know if he's in my top 10.
Are you serious?
I don't know if he's in my top 10.
Oh,
but
okay.
I say that he's a legend.
He's a legend.
He's a legend, for sure.
Know? All right, Crockett. All right, man. All right.
He must be a Boston fan over here.
Oh, nah, you know,
Chi-Town.
to the grain,
To
man.
the grain. I'm
Chi-Town to the grain, man. You know, I
So
ain't
my
got
last topic is a good friend of mine gave me one of those. They're really hot right now. Her name's Donna. She gave me it for Christmas. Those DNA things for where you spit in there.
Oh, yeah.
And you get your ancestry and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Ancestry.com.
Yeah. So, of course, I haven't done it yet. So, but I looked it up, given a lot of the identity issues with the African American community, and come to find out, it's very controversial on the idea of looking up your ancestry, given African Americans have a varied history, and you know, from the diaspora up from the South, obviously being slaves and all that. And one article talked about how these, I don't know what they're called again, DNA things might be a problem for our history because it's so varied and diverse and to a lot of degree ugly, right? And I know, kind of leading into why we have Walter Smith here, I know the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage did some type of genealogy, something. This is when I was on there. But how important is this idea of identity, taking a swab, getting your DNA, trying to figure out and track your history?
I don't know how to answer that question for a lot of reasons. One, I think that as far as identity is concerned, I would consider spiritual identity primary to cultural or ethnic identity, just me personally. But the challenge is that, again, when society defines you, or when society can create parameters for what you believe about you, or about your history, then it can define you and keep you within a certain pathology. And, you know, I was just thinking about the other day, somebody else was talking to me about ancestry, and my father, before he passed, called me and was telling me about some of our history from Louisiana.
Yeah.
And, you know, something I'd never even heard before. And that some of our genealogy was from South America. And I was like, well, really? And not Africa, but South America. And it intrigued me to know that, but it still doesn't define me as a person. I just realized that a lot of that sordid history that even he's, you know, figuring out, 60 years old, figuring out that, you know, that this is a part of our line. It's intriguing, but it doesn't define for me. So I think a lot of people are doing it because they feel pressure to do it. And, you know, and then maybe they get some kind of benefit satisfaction from it. I don't know. But for me, it's just a matter of, it's information. It can be helpful in growing and understanding maybe your path, but it's not defining to me. So
is it, let me ask this, is it more important in areas like South Minnesota, where Maryland, LA, Indianapolis, Chicago, where there's a lot of rich African American heritage? You know, there's not just the stereotypes of sports, entertainment, but you got black doctors and lawyers, and you got African American everything. And so the sense of identity is a little bit richer in those communities. Crockett, as you work with at-risk youth, is it bigger in this community, and obviously, Walter, what you do, to make sure kids know, hey, these African American boxes that are usually illustrated in the media, that's not all there is, man.
I could tell you this, because I came here, you know, just removed from high school, you know, and I've been here probably maybe about 23 years or 22 years, and it probably maybe a year and a half ago, or maybe it could be a year ago, Walter Smith and some of his consultant buddies came to Rochester Area Foundation. And it was pretty much, I mean, it was some 5 years. 5 years, okay. It was some we were talking about the housing crisis, affordable housing, and everything like that. Some of the neat work they are doing up in the cities, and they came with this. I mean, this excellent PowerPoint. You know, I mean, they came, you know, ducks together, and me from being here 23 years and not really seeing that many black professionals in one setting. It was something to me. It was enriching to me because on my day-to-day basis, I mean, I may see one every 3-4 years, but not seeing 5 or 6 doing major work from commissioners. You're talking about from lawyers. I'm talking about owning their own construction thing. I mean, I went back home energized and saying, you know what, even for me, I longed, you know what I'm talking about? 23 years here. I longed to have seeing professional excellence in there. And so as an adult was 40-something years old, can you imagine how kids feel?
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? How kids feel. I mean, they're going to school, they don't see a professional. They go to the doctor's office, don't see a professional. I mean, everywhere they go, they don't see a professional. Here it is. If I felt like this, imagine how they felt. And I said to myself, there's hope. I see, and we always say that African Americans can work together, but I see 5 or 6 top-notch, intelligent people making things happen. And so the kids that I deal with, that they struggle with having someone professional like them because it's foreign to them, and so they rather say don't do it than do it because I don't know how long you're gonna stay in.
That's true. Wow, that's you. And Walter, as you deal with that, and let's get on Walter. And Walter, thank you for being here. Again, a board member for the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage. You also do a lot in the community, like a consultant. Can you let us know what you do, what you get into here locally, and then we can definitely get into the council piece?
Well, just a short bit of history. I came into this community 5 years ago by invitation to do some consulting work with a medical consultant who was working with Mayo and one of, how you doing, brother? In one of the firms that's located in Stewartville. And she's a high level medical consultant, actually from Miami, Florida area. I was still in Los Angeles, and she and her husband called me repeatedly to come to Rochester. I actually thought they were talking about Rochester, New York.
New York.
I didn't know they were talking about Rochester,
Yeah.
Minnesota.
Yeah.
But when she mentioned Mayo, I looked it up. But I was still hesitant to come. And then in April of 2014, they called me again and told me, really got up underneath me a little and said that they'd been praying and they thought this was a community that I'd like to, to visit and do some work. So I decided to come. And then I ended up staying after 60 days of consulting. I was at the time grieving the loss of my wife, looking to move from LA anyway.
Right.
But came into the community and I got so busy that I fell in love with Rochester. And I'm back and forth to the cities, to Miami, to St. Louis. And then one consulting assignment led to another. I started working with everybody in the cities, and then connected to the Rondo Lambridge project now and other activities. But it all became about historically kind of what my path has been.
Right.
I used to work on the East Coast for Associated Black Charities headquartered in Baltimore. I was on the Eastern Shore, and it was during my time with that work that I connected more to African American heritage. Frederick Douglass and others were a part of that Underground Railroad system. I got educated about our people. I participated in Harriet Tubman Day in 2003, was a keynote, and I just got kind of baptized, as they say, into our culture. And the more that I did, I felt proud that I had been basically anointed to do this work. So when I got to Minnesota, as I started working for everybody in, I heard a statistic that came through a book and an article written by Dr. Algernon Austin about Minnesota being near last, with disparities. And then I felt very strongly that I needed to step up, and very quickly I found my place. And just started connecting first with individuals in the cities, and then I built some relationships here in Rochester where I've always lived. Got a few clients here, and I decided, even though it was very hard, very difficult for an African American consultant that is not tied to Mayo, because I've never worked for Mayo, to live here. And I just started to build relationships. Brother Andre was one of the first people I met. He and I started working together on one of his projects, and again, I got rooted and planted here in Rochester. And the next thing I know, Governor Dayton invited me to participate in the council. That kind of came very quickly, and I was curious as to how he knew me. But it was a special period in April of 2017 where Governor Dayton was, I think, concerned about the state of the council.
No doubt.
And my name was given to him, and then I went through a short interview and met with Dr. Lewis Porter at the time, who was still the head of CMAH, and a month later I was on the council. So since that time, I've seen, of course, the transition of Dr. Lewis, the transition into the council of Justin Terrell. We probably have a stronger board, similar to the time when you were participating. We have a stronger board now, and we have, I think, a good mix of African American and African heritage
folks
mix on the board. So that's how I got to this place, and now I'm really excited because I feel like we can move, because we have some, not just progressive thinkers, but people who understand how significant it is that this council stands up. Because just a few years ago, they were trying to get rid of us.
They were?
So that's how I got to this point.
So when you say consulting, do you do medical consulting?
No, the consultant that was here was working on a project that required some infrastructure development. I do what's called organizational development consulting. My specialty is in community economic development, land development, and public-private partnerships. So some of my projects are working within an organization to expand its capacity to be able to work on a project or take on an endeavor the otherwise aren't qualified. The Rondo Lambridge project is something that I've been a part of since its infancy, and I'm the principal consultant for that project, which is the restoration of 50 years later that the I-94 was run through the Rondo community of St. Paul.
Right.
So now the agencies that basically perpetrated and basically decimated Rondo are now at the table,
Right.
including the city of St. Paul, Ramsey County, Minnesota Department of Transportation. They're now at the table looking at the potential of a land bridge, approximately a 21-acre
Right.
land bridge to restore what was stolen
Right.
58 plus years ago. So that's kind of a culmination of my process. I mean, the land bridge is $1 billion plus project, but it's something, you know, now 50 years later, we're doing the very complex work of orchestrating conversations, even with Met Council,
Right.
the regional planning and development agency that's looking at this. And I think because the land bridge is a disruption, it's nothing
Right.
anybody ever thought would happen. It's now, I call it a reckoning and a renaissance. So now we're pointing fingers at
That's
the
good.
injustice, but now we're positioning a community to now take ownership that they lost
Right.
and ultimately to restore it. So we're looking at everything from any innovation that we could do, capturing emissions of cars, every kind of green building and business that we can establish. In the 50s, when the I-94 went through the Rondo community, there were 600 homes and 300 businesses that were lost.
This was all an African American community for those who are not familiar with Rondo.
It was about 85% African American at the time. Now there's probably 40% African American.
Wow.
And it's very diverse now. But then it was 85% African American, and it was like a Black Wall Street for a lot of people who don't understand how significant it was. These were black folks who were upper middle class, who owned their homes, who had businesses. There were bankers. There were barbershops. There were you know, on and on. So now what's being proposed is to basically restore everything was lost plus. So that's again, it's culminating for me because I've done things throughout the years in different parts of the country, but this is being seen as a national model in the face of what transportation has done to black folks.
Right.
Transportation has been one of the ills because there are 1,600 communities around the country that suffered like Rondo. Every single one of those communities were black.
Right. Oh yeah.
So that was not a coincidence. So the urban renewal and the federal highway system devastated black folks in the 50s and 60s, and that was around the time, of course, that our communities began to take a nosedive. And then they pulled manufacturing out of our communities. And again, you know, we used to be able to go to high school and get a plumber's certificate and get a this and that certificate, but they just started to systematically attack black folks. And so from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we became devastated by this institutional racism. And now we're really still recovering.
Oh, without question.
The ramifications of it are still here today.
So, as some may not know, Walter was runner-up for the Republican seat for 25B for state representative.
Yes, sir.
Over on the northwest side. How was that process? You're only 5 years in. You're jumping into the political fray from LA, one of the third largest cities in the nation, down to the third largest city in Minnesota. How was that process running for office?
Well,
as a Republican, no less.
First of all, I had a lot of people in the cities who I worked with 3 or 4 years by that time who were scratching their heads that I ran as a Republican.
And get ready, Crockett's about to hit you with a
he can bring it. He can absolutely bring it. For the last 10, 15 years, as I've grown and matured, what was important to me is to not be politicized, cornered by partisan politics. I'm issue centric when it comes to politics.
That's good.
So I am not a person who jumps on party side, and I understand the history both of the Democratic and Republican parties. The issue is a lot of our people don't know anything about our Republican roots because black folks voted Republican until the 60s. And then after Kennedy, when they did some switcherooing and kind of a campaign of sorts around how we would participate, since that time, Democratic Party has basically run black communities and has purported race identity politics as a soapbox for keeping us
Did
loyal.
y'all hear that race identity project?
he's deep. This
He's
fella is
really
deep. This
yeah.
fella is deep. But you
Definitely
know,
deep.
just to get into, I mean,
Yes.
I do my homework too and research
Yes,
too.
sir.
As crazy as I am, I do. And people don't know, we say our first black president was who, right?
Yeah, Obama. Yeah, that's what they say.
It was our, but I'm talking about Bill. They said Bill. You
Bill
know Bill.
Clinton.
Bill the Hammer Clinton. Knock everything down. But that Bill. But you know what? The mass incarceration happened because of Bill.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right? And we were saying that, oh man, he's our first black real president, but they don't understand, why we in some of the crisis, some of the situation we is in right now because of the candidacy of Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and some of the rest of them. And I think that when you go against the grain and stuff like that, and because we stay, as long as they can keep us ignorant, they can keep us down. Right? And half of the time, the information never gets to the people so they can make an intelligent decision.
Right.
That's why we doing right here and saying we're gonna get some information to people
Really good.
so they can make an intelligent decision.
Really good.
Because you black don't you have to be Democrat, you don't have to be a Republican, you can be independent, but you're gonna have to start picking the best candidates gonna help your community get out of the situation they're in and hold them accountable.
Very
right,
good, sir.
Right? You got hold them accountable. I don't care if they're white, you gotta hold them accountable. If they're black, you gotta hold them accountable. I'm talking about you can't just give them a pass. You can't just give them a pass. You know what I'm talking about?
That's right.
So when I jumped in, I can tell you when I jumped in because there's a vacuum of leadership, not just in politics.
Right.
If you look at race identity politics across the nation, you look at the Sharptons and the Jesse Jacksons. We've been served in injustice. While I respect those men, and I would never put my mouth on their seed sowing, and what they've done throughout history. I can tell you that we've been served in injustice in many respects by the path that they've taken that have not served our community well.
Right.
And so when you look at the vacuum of leadership, I honest to God believe that if you are a public servant, if you have a servant's heart, politics is somewhere that you should potentially pursue because that is probably the best place for us to shape policy, which is part of why our communities struggle so much. We're underneath some policies that are ruinous and destructive. So when I jumped in, I had been praying for 18 months, my wife and I had several conversations. I was actually asked to speak at the Conservative Conversations Group. I didn't even know what that was here in Rochester.
I still don't. But
and Fran Bradley, I'll mention his name. Fran Bradley invited me to the meeting, and this meeting is white men, average age 70, to be perfectly honest with you. And the room was full. It was packed. I walked into that room. I went and got my little coffee, and they served a little breakfast. And got my coffee and breakfast, walked into the room, and everybody was looking at me like, what the hell are you doing up in here? And I sat down. One of the gentlemen walked over to me and explained, this is Conservative Conversations. What is your name? What is your name? I told him. I said, Fran Bradley has invited me. He said, oh, you're welcome. I sat there and I ate, and they got into conversations, and Fran just briefly introduced me. And then the second time I came, he said, I need you to speak. So I spoke about an hour and a half, and they asked me questions. And I'm telling you, it was one of the richest, most powerful exchanges I've ever had, because a lot of the stereotypical questions came. But then shortly after they received responses that put them on their heels, then we had a very productive conversation because they realized that a lot of the stereotypical ways that they view things and their question about why black folks don't support Republicans, we were able just to get into the nitty gritty about it and I was very forthright and honest with them around not only the poor branding and marketing the Republican Party has done.
Oh my goodness.
But the way that they've sided with neo-Confederates, the way they've sided with nationalist movements, that's confusing. So while we know we're the party of Lincoln, we're the party that basically abolished slavery, you still are enslaving people. So it's a mixed message. So I thought they would never invite me the second time. So I got it all out. You know, I swung like for the rafters, left the room, and then 2 weeks later he invited me back.
Oh, nice.
And I spoke a second time, and this is when I encountered who was then my landlord, who you all would know is Joe Weiss. And Joe Weiss is one of the builders of 80% of the affordable housing in the city of Rochester. And it was an interesting exchange with him, but he stopped me in the middle of talking. And he basically looked at me across the room and said, "That's the smartest damn thing I've ever heard there, young man," right? And before he left, he stopped me again and said, "I have somewhere to go. I'm not leaving because of you."
Right.
Very interesting exchange, but then there was respect, I felt, that came not only to our people, but to our community, that we're not ignorant. We ain't just getting high. We ain't just, you feel me?
Yeah. Right.
And that conversation led to Fran Bradley and the chair and co-chair of the Republican Party approaching me and asking me to first consult them, and I still haven't.
Right.
Because what I want to do, and this is one of the things, Donovan, I can tell you, this is one of the things I want to do with you and with Pastor Andre. They want to be educated.
Right. Right.
And not just around the election.
That's good.
So I said to them, okay, I'll do it. I'll consult the Olmsted County GOP.
Yeah.
And I'll put together a program so that we can literally, the community
Right.
of elders and the people of God, black folks, can educate. And Fran said to me, "This is not about the GOP, this is about me." He said, "I personally need this."
Really?
And he said, "If the GOP doesn't want to do it, I don't care. I want to do it." And so to this day, I have to honor his request and step up to the plate and do some education, because he said he believes the party has served an injustice to the community, and he knows the reason that black folks aren't voting Republican is because they don't see themselves.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely.
So do you think, I have seen, other blacks, who's Republicans and stuff, and they lose their identity.
Yes,
or
they do.
not be authentic. But I seen Walter go into a room and be Walter.
Right.
And challenge, actually challenge their ideology, their thinking process and stuff. I think until we start showing them that, we are intelligent.
Right.
Right? We thinkers.
Yes.
And they need diversity. Right? They need some kind of diverse, different type of mindset.
Exactly.
Because they've been trying to fix disparities and all this stuff. They put money behind it and all this stuff. And it's worse now
Than it was before.
than it ever been before.
Yeah.
Right? How can you keep throwing millions at something which you tried this new program, bringing in national people from there, and it's worse now than ever before. So I commend Walter, and
thank you, sir.
And I'm where I'm at partly because of Walter. I was have a nonprofit, and I won't get into all that, but a funder thought it was best for me to expand, to grow, and for me to have a consultant. And one of the things I told him that I told him I want a consultant, but I didn't want a white consultant because some of the stuff that I was dealing with, he couldn't probably identify with some of the barriers that someone who's a CEO have to deal with. Right. He couldn't understand that. It's just so I wanted someone who loved me. So he went out, did his research, and he said, Walter,
There we go.
First, I was skeptical at first, I want to know if Walter was certified.
Amen.
I want to know, me, I'm going to hit him. I'm talking about street. I'm a hood 100. That's why people think I'm crazy. The same way I act right here, I walk in the room, act the same way. I'm talking about the same way, never change. That's why people respect me, what I'm talking about? Same way, and I was like, no, I said, man, that's not only that, but he gets it, right? And so he was able to teach me some language. You see, once you start moving from one dimension to another dimension, the big thing is language. People understand that it's language. And so language is everything. So the problem is that they're looking for, I had to find out when I'm going to those funders and I'm talking to higher level people, they're looking for language.
Yes.
So I met with the guy from, I think he was the vice president of Wells Fargo. Yes. Vice president of Wells Fargo.
Dude,
and,
I didn't know that.
And so, Wells Fargo. You know, I got an accent. Get for the birds. Illinois. I didn't mess with him. But what was interesting, so I wrote the grant and everything, right? And I had to go through this interview process. And he remembered me from, I guess, when I first started, maybe a couple years ago, 2 years into it. Right. And he looked across the table and he asked me one question. He said, "How do you know our language?"
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
And you received it right?
I received it right because he understood something, right?
Right.
He understood that now I understand how the process works. So they're looking at language, right? Yeah. And he was saying that you only have to go through the whole process, and instead of him even interviewing me anymore, we talked about other stuff. See, that's how it works, right?
Yeah, that's
So
how it
now
works.
you pass that barrier, right? You pass that barrier. And so oftentimes, if you don't have someone who has been where Walter been at, so he was able to take me from where I was at to bring me up, so I could be able to communicate to that level, right? So every level you're at is a different communicating level you have to go to.
Well, let me ask you,
Go ahead.
Crockett and Walter.
Yes.
How do you do that when so many people, when they're about to go next level, they don't want to do what you did because they feel like they're going to be a sellout? How do you? I deal with that. I mean, y'all deal with it too. When I talk to brothers in the jail,
That's
whatever.
a good question.
They don't want to go next level. Or when we have a kid who went off to eat, we got him through the criminal justice process. He's off to college.
Yeah.
And he's going next level with his life, but he feels like he's a sellout now because he's getting an education and he's starting to do pro-social stuff. How do you teach or tell folks that's not selling out what you did?
Well, what I would say to you is, and that is a really, really good question.
Yeah.
What I would say to you is, there's a difference between navigating the system
Right.
and participating in the system.
Yes. Yeah.
So participating is when they think you're siding when you've sold out.
Right.
When you just headlong, just believing everything, and then you start to bash because your identity is in this next level, this next dimension of opportunity, whatever. That's participating and then selling out.
Right.
But when you navigate, that means that you have to understand. It's like having a key.
Right.
Opening a door.
Yeah.
If you can't open the door,
and
you keep screaming at the door, open the door, open the door.
Right.
You no progress.
Right.
Eventually, you'll keep that insane path.
Right.
Or you'll figure out the key that opens the door, and that's what navigating the system's about.
Yeah.
So that's what Andre's talking about. He didn't go into that relationship, into that conversation with that VP at Wells Fargo and start conforming. Because when you participate, you conform.
Yeah.
Then you become something you're not.
Right.
When you navigate, you are who you are, but you understand the passcode. You understand the keys to get you to places.
Huge. And how do you teach that? My therapist here.
How do I teach it? I think having individuals such as Walter or other people who has been there before, right? And so our biggest thing was that, we don't have other people, especially in our community, we don't have other people to help us get to that point or get to that doors, right? We want to hold on to everything and don't want to share, right? We don't want to reach back, and that's what he was talking about. I'm not going to put my mouth on other leaders in the sense of Jesse Jackson and the rest of them. They brought their children and stuff with them and their relatives, but they didn't bring everybody else with them, And so we gotta change that paradigm. We gotta change it. We gotta reach back and say, you know what? We got this amount of years on. We know this amount of people because they do it all the time for their kids. They hook them up in internships. We're talking about and all these things, but we tend not to do that for our kids. We successful, right? But there's no need for us to have success. Right? If we don't bring somebody else to be successful too, right?
If we make them figure it out.
And make them figure it out, right? And so when I said I wanted when we talk about capacity building, they didn't understand. The agency that was funding me didn't understand what I was talking about. They didn't understand the barriers of how do I navigate this level. Right? I already capped out at this level, right? Now the problem was that how do I get here because there's so many doors are being shut, right?
Oh yeah.
And so when I realized that I had the language here, but I didn't have the language here. Right?
Yeah.
And so it was Walter that helped me with that. So I was real good at programming, right? I could do programming. Programming is different than running an organization. Most people don't know that, right? It's the same thing. It's the same thing. If you can cook chicken and you can cook, you can
pumpkin
cook
pie,
right? Pumpkin pie for him.
Sweet potato pie.
Make sure you're blessing with one of them.
Sweet potato.
But you understand, there's a difference because now because you can cook don't mean you can run a restaurant.
True that.
Right? So most people say, well, I can cook, but people say, go ahead and start that restaurant. You can do it. No, you can't. Right?
That's right.
If you don't understand finances and you don't understand all the rest of the stuff that goes with it, inventory and all this type of stuff, you can't do it. You can't do it. The big difference between a mom and pops and a Walmart, right?
Right. System and organization.
System and organization. right? The reason why grassroots organizations proudly permeate African Americans or them don't grow is because what he just talking about, right?
Exactly.
Right? So they'll have you at the table and nickel and dime you because they know you don't have the infrastructure, right? But once you start building the infrastructure, right? It opened up to you more opportunities, and you don't always have to try to get money here. It opened up other opportunities, right?
That's what happened to him.
Right, and that's what happened. That's what happened to me. So now, when I go into a room, right, they already know I know the language, right, and so they're gonna have to intentionally. They have to intentionally say, "I'm not gonna give it to you."
A little bit of swag, you know, a little bit, you know.
So that's why I said I thank you, Walter. I'm in 3 different states. You know what I mean? He really helped me out. And I highly recommend this guy. You're talking about anyone that goes.
I need some of that juice you got, Walter.
Let it do it, right? Walter go in there and command the room, right? Because you know he coming in with swag and confidence and say, I know what I'm talking about, right? And oftentimes we get in there, especially you start talking to CEOs, you only got 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's it.
You know what I'm talking about? So you can't go in there and not know what you're talking about. Doing you know, you gotta do your research, you gotta do your homework, and you go in there, right? I tell people you only got 1 shot at the title.
True. One shot.
I tell my kids all the time, I don't know if you know 1 shot at the title means that oftentimes as pro athletes, when we take over an NFL team, NBA team, we usually take over teams that's struggling, messed up, right? And we only get 1 shot, right? And if we don't turn that thing around, you probably never be a head coach again in professional sports. And our counterparts can run it down, right? Next thing you know, they go to another team. It's because you know why they get another chance. Not only because they're white, they built relationships. Right. See, one thing we don't know how to do called network. You know what I'm talking about?
That's
network
big.
Want to sell out, right?
But
That's
you
not
have,
selling
it's
out.
not.
I know. Yeah.
It's not selling. Not really selling out. But we do networking all the time.
Yeah.
That's
right?
why I eat pumpkin pie.
You're right. You know, Donnie is a bona fide politician. He's stamped.
He got political skills.
4 years ago, the first black mayor. You hear right on Barbershop Talk, right here.
Oh my goodness.
Right here. He can relate with y'all too because he eat pumpkin pie.
He got my vote.
You're saying something that brought something to my mind when I was in, and this is on a serious note, but it's I feel it in my soul. The first time I said it, and every time I say it, it almost makes me emotional. But I was in Miami, Florida, on a platform talking to several hundred people, and I was asked to go up and say something. I had nothing to say, but I was in a church, a large church. And the bishop who asked me to say something, I was consulting him. So he just wanted to kind of introduce me to the people. And they were having a Black History celebration and commemoration at the time. And the only thing I knew to say is walk up and grab the microphone just like this. And I said to every bishop on that front row and to all the pastors behind them, stop being a missionary cause for white folks.
Ooh. You just dropped it like that, huh?
And the room just went flat. And it came out. I don't even know where it came from. It just came out of my spirit.
Right.
We cannot be a missionary cause for white folks. We are not needy.
Right. And how do you flip that script?
Well, a lot of it is what he just
because it's been so
said.
programmed since you mentioned
just,
the 70s, 60s, you know, that whole thing, right? It's been so programmed.
We're not a missionary cause, and the more that I think about it, and if we as a people would think about how resilient we are, how much we can emerge out of struggle, we can be at our last and make it.
Right.
I mean, just think about it. Just
Yes.
When you think about all the odds that are stacked against us, all the systems that are institutionally framed to keep us out, when you think about that, and then we still emerge, you know, in the NFL, the NBA, the entertainment community. Yes. We still emerge as trend-setting. We still emerge as number one. We still emerge. Right. When you think about how strong we are as a people, and you flip it from all the disparity and all the data that says we're the worst and we're this and we're that. A lot of that is just about how it's shared or how it's communicated. Right. There's just as many white folks in prison as there are blacks. Yes. Right. But if you look at the statistics, it appears that we're worse off.
Right. Exactly.
But a lot of that is the problem. because we're looking outside of ourselves for our identity.
Yes.
Right.
And this is what,
Yeah.
this is why it was easy to help Andre.
Right.
Because Andre's not looking outside of himself for his identity.
Right.
He was actually asking a question that challenged the system that was resisting him
Right.
from graduating further into
Right.
his process for his organization to be able to help more people.
Mhm.
He's an African American practitioner helping African American, primarily at risk
Right.
kids.
Right.
Why in the world wouldn't you support him?
Exactly.
But that was the issue. They couldn't give an answer for why they weren't supporting a black man helping black kids.
Right.
Because they're riding on the back of our struggle. So they're getting the grants instead of giving us the grants.
Oh.
They're using the
Wow.
resources that
Right.
they should be giving to us for themselves. So they have these white practitioners helping at-risk kids, but not really helping them.
Right. Exactly.
Just placating.
Right.
Just
Right.
so that's why it was easy to help Andre. Andre is brilliant.
Oh
He's
yeah,
really,
absolutely.
really intelligent.
A social
And they
service
knew he
engineer.
was.
Yeah.
And they knew he was. They were just trying to keep him from his next step.
Right.
And then as soon as he took it without asking permission, now stuff just starts coming. I mean, now he's
Right.
growing. His organization is taking off.
Right. So as we got almost an hour here.
Wow.
Yeah, this is good stuff. We should have an after party the whole night.
Yes.
Council on Black Minnesotans, you're a consultant. How do we get your organization? I said the wrong one. Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage.
Yeah, Council of Minnesotans of African Heritage.
How do we get that on the lips of every organization in here trying to, I mean, because there's so many organizations doing this, that, and the other, obviously politics. How do we get that on the lips of every entity, effort, initiative that's trying to do things here locally in South Minnesota? Your name as well on the lips of folks, and how do people know that Walter, the council, your consultant can help folks?
That's a really good question. One of the challenges of working for the council is government agencies have a lot of bureaucracy
No doubt.
and politics around what they can do and how they can do it. The statute determines a lot of that. I can say that we're turning the corner. We had a rich conversation. The last board meeting we attended for the year was probably the best board meeting to me, because we're getting to the brass tacks of how we're going to grow.
Right.
And to be perfectly honest with you, outer Minnesota, outside the Twin Cities, there are greater migration of minorities showing up in communities that I think are surprising.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I see it all the time.
It's happening. The issue is that while we have to have a set agenda as a council to move us forward, so that we can have a greater impact upon the lives of African heritage people, we also have to have an openness, and we have to have a form of outreach that allows people's voices to be heard and a consistent representation in the community.
Right.
I'm shifting a little in my consultancy, because while I'm still going to be doing what I'm doing, I don't have to travel as much, because I was in a kind of a building stage the last 2 or 3 years. I have established relationships. I feel confident that people will hire me, right? And I won't, be somewhere begging for work outside of Minnesota. So now I can be in Rochester more.
That's good.
That's what I want to do. And as far as Rochester is concerned, I'm going to work with the team of people here in the city for us to have a robust agenda, dealing with Mayo, dealing with the DMC, doing all the stuff that we can to position people of color here. And once we get a set agenda and we have a rallying support system here, then I think that the council will fund a position here. And I think that'll be
mayor's office. I know Kim Norton. She's been supportive, kind of the mother of DMC, so on and so forth. Do you think her new office is going to be very supportive?
I think that she'll be supportive once she understands what needs to happen. There's been a lot of transitions in the county and city here in Rochester, Olmsted County and city of Rochester, and Brother Andre can tell you, I've been in their face for 3 years pointing fingers, and a lot of the transitions that have been made are in our best interest as a people, because, for instance, the Destination Medical Center is an example of where we can, as a people, be greatly benefited by what's going to happen economically over a 20-year period here. But there's no front office for us to participate.
Exactly.
So we've asked to be that front office. We've asked that the organization of agencies around the state, Thor, Shaw Lundquist, the professional technical engineers, all these different, that we converge, that we have a consortium of sorts that is able to participate in these activities because they've never been able to penetrate the veil here.
Oh no,
You know,
exactly.
So I think that she will be open if she sees the intelligent way we'd like to approach it. That takes the burden off of them because they're not culturally competent. They're not culturally proficient. They don't know how to deal with black folks without offending them.
Right.
So we think if we can be the front office to be a welcoming mat for participation of black businesses and minority businesses, that'll be a starting point.
That'd be great.
For a shift here. The same thing's going on with affordable housing. Now it seems that because they're moving forward with some plans, they've asked us for proposals, which is
that's good.
first. Now they're asking for proposals, so the consortium and groups that we're putting together, not only here in Rochester but outside the city, we're all coming together because the narrative is there's not enough black businesses. There's no construction. There's no professional technical. That's a lie. They exist.
That's a big lie.
They exist, but that's what they said to us straight across the table.
And I hear that all the time when they talk about hiring. No, there's no.
So my last communication during Leadership Greater Rochester, I participated last year. I looked across the desk at a bunch of high-ups at Mayo, high-ups at DMC. They were all in a panel for Leadership Greater Rochester. And they were having this rich conversation about black folks, and there wasn't nobody black in the room but me and one other person. So I stopped the conversation, stopped talking about us, right? And asked one question that dismantled their whole cheerleading thing. And the question was, you're talking about workforce and there being a lack of employable people on one side of the equation. And then on the other side of the equation, black folks who are well qualified can't find jobs. It's the same conversation. You just don't want to have it at the same time.
Right, exactly.
So there are qualified black folks who can fill not only line management but above positions that need to be plugging in. And that's what needs to happen. So I think now they're a little gun shy because they're afraid of that conversation, whether it's going to turn into something hostile or no, but you're going to have to face the fact that you have resisted welcoming and opening yourself up to people who are different. And they're more open to immigrant blacks than they are African Americans, and that's a part of the issue. If you come from Somalia or East Africa or somewhere, and you're a master's, and they'll welcome you in the system. But when you come from the U.S. and you're African American, it's a very interesting.
It is. Crockett talks about that all the time.
So that's the starting point for things. But I can tell you that you have been, Mr. Donovan, you have been extremely significant in 2018 to push the council along, because when you welcomed Justin Terrell, you did not welcome him with open arms. You punched him right in his eye and told him step up. Do
that was Crockett. I just follow orders.
No, that was you.
That was you, Don.
And he felt it. He felt it. And I coached him a little. I said, well, Don's a good cat. He's on the council. But it moved him to focus his attentions and his energy different on how to build the council, because we have to have a critical mass of black folks who are supportive and who are on one page.
And it seems to make sense. I mean, if we're the third largest city, Mayo, internationally known, all kinds of loot here, I mean, you would think you'd have representation.
But you helped. And now I think we're about to get over a hump for reassignment, and you just need to stay that course around asking. But we need to have an agenda here and be sensitive about how we carry it forward, and I know that they will commit the dollars.
Do you guys still work with like the humanities and blah blah blah, the humanities, the arts and all that kind of stuff, get grants and stuff like that?
One of the conversations we've had recently in the council is what we're gonna do moving forward, because the council can pursue grants outside of our government funding. The challenge is the council losing its main identity to be a broker with the governor, the legislature, and the community. We don't want to get outside of that primary assignment, right?
Got it.
But at the same time, we can't show favoritism to one side of the community or the other. So we're being approached now by certain entities throughout the community in Twin Cities and outside of it who want to partner with the council to pursue this grant or to pursue that grant. And I think that we're going to end up doing more of that moving forward. I think we should do that. But it's just how we do it and being very intentional about making sure that whatever project we're connected to connects right back to our legislative priorities. So that's what's.
So at some point, entities or whatever down here can hook up with, if you guys go that route again.
See, we're talking about making sure that, and this is my statement in the last meeting. You cannot have a policy that is not connected to a project and move anything in St. Paul.
Right.
Every policy has to have a connected project.
Right.
That's how it works, and that's how things get funded. Right.
Right.
So we have to have players in the community that we can rally and support. So that's a little different than I think the communities understood of the council. It's community felt like it had to go connect to the council to get stuff done. We're saying no. The philosophy is the council got to connect with the community to get stuff done.
Okay.
So we're going to be looking for the players. We're going to be looking for Andre and looking for Donovan around criminal justice, around at risk. And if you're a champion in your community and we can support you, that's exactly what we're going to do.
Okay.
And then that will enable us to then have demonstrations
Right.
of what works, and then say, now change the policy.
Another question I had, that was deep, is that how do we get skilled minorities to start participating on boards of nonprofits that typically ran by minorities?
Now, there's an agency in the Twin Cities that does just what you said. They function to equip not just minorities, but people in general, to equip them for board participation and preparation and all that. And I can't call it off the
here they got ready to leave.
Yeah.
Here you got ready to leave.
Yeah.
But what I'm finding out is that most of our minorities who have skill sets, they don't volunteer on boards that is led by pretty much individuals that look like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
Well, the chamber is a perfect example. Okay, I joined the Chamber of Commerce in Rochester in 2014, not because I knew it was going to give me any business. I haven't gotten one business call through the Chamber of Commerce. I joined because it legitimizes my business.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely.
Okay. And I paid the premium every month. Right. Ain't nothing bounced. So when somebody looks me up and they see member since 2014. That's an indication to me that I'm legitimate and I understand the importance of the chamber. I've had a conversation with two of the VPs of the chamber about the lack of minority participation on the chamber, because we're not represented in the board, the board of the chamber. And for instance, I asked them straight to their face. I sit on the board of International Quality Healthcare, which is right across the street. They're the largest PCA provider in Minnesota, minority based.
Really?
They have 19 branch offices. They are right across the street.
I did not know that.
I asked the VP over membership, you know who they are? He looked at me and shook his head no. I said, that is a shame.
Right.
That you don't know. They have over 1,000 employees, 19 branch offices, based in Rochester. And you don't know who they are.
Right.
And there's something wrong with that. And so I said it that way so that the chamber could open its eyes to the potential of not only its own growth, but that minority businesses are viable, are needed, are critical in this community, and are critical to the economy in Minnesota, because we're treated like liabilities, not assets. And they stop treating us like liabilities and see that we are assets, and then open their eyes to what we are actually doing. And that's what I said to Andre. He ain't got to do nothing different. People just need to see you. And they'll support you because you're doing something.
Actually getting it done.
Same thing with quality healthcare. They're doing something, and they had a hard time getting a loan from Wells Fargo. Still to this day, are challenged around their banking relationship, and they got plenty of income. Why are they challenged?
Right.
That's systemic. That's institutional.
And so what do you think about what you were saying about, you know, African Americans and Eastern Africans and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so now the council is a mixture of everybody.
It's
right?
almost 50-50.
50-50.
Is it? Oh, that's good.
It's almost 50-50.
Almost there.
And so what I, you know, what I have found out is that, you know, I mean, I don't help, you know, Somalia nonprofits and I mean various other ones, but they help me too,
Yeah.
right? Because I think we had, you know, real dialogue, right? Because sometimes they'll ask me and say, brother, I just can't understand. You know, we come here, we prosperous, you know,
Yes.
and y'all don't want to make no money.
Yes.
I look up and say, man, who don't want to make no money?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Sometimes, when you look at the who don't,
Right.
brother, hey, don't get no fools out your mouth. You think I don't want to make money? We want to make money. Like, man, what's the matter with you?
Right.
Do you know why he asked you that though?
Yeah. I know why you asked me that.
Well,
You know,
drop it, let it
because
go.
of, you know, stereotype.
But
And, go ahead.
amongst our people,
Go ahead.
the challenge is that if you're smart enough to lead, the issue is will you lead and submit?
Yes.
Okay, so if you're willing to lead and submit, that's called tokenism,
Yes.
and they will
This dude is dropping.
prop you up
Yes.
Yeah.
as the token,
Yes.
and then everybody in the community is looking at you,
Yeah.
Django.
like right. That it's
Y'all watch Django?
Willie Lynch.
Oh yeah. Django.
They will prop you up.
Yeah.
What's that character?
Samuel Jackson. Samuel
Yeah,
Jackson.
What's his name?
Oh,
Uncle
he
Rick,
should have got an
I mean,
Oscar for that. Oh,
See Django?
Yeah, what was the
Yeah,
guy?
yeah.
Oh, Jamie Foxx.
Jamie.
No, the guy that Sam Jackson played. The one that Sam Jackson played.
Samuel Jackson played.
The one that.
Oh, you talking about ugly?
It was good.
He was the gatekeeper. He was the gatekeeper.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And so what you're saying is that you got a bunch of gatekeepers.
Yeah.
They get there, they don't want nobody else.
They treat them like
yes.
tokens, and once they're in, then it's they look down or frown upon everybody else and ask questions like that.
Yeah.
Do you want to make? Of course, I want to make money.
Right.
But it's how they position people to basically, you know, it's
How do we break that in this community? Because it's so darn professional. So we have some unity and we can get some stuff done.
Yeah.
Or is that everybody talking
Yeah,
stupid?
no, you're not. So that's why I said we had to have that conversation. So me and him had, you know, talking about went to school together and stuff. We had that conversation, and so he begins to talk about how because of their, you know, immigrants that they tend to help them through the procedures and the policies and stuff, right? And show them how to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, and so what was good was we built those relationships. Now, in turn, he comes back and show me what they showed him. You see what I'm talking about?
Right.
So now he's showing me now how you know, the policies and the procedures that they taught him to be able to do. Because there's some things they have teaching them, but they would never teach us.
Right.
Right? And so you need to connect to someone from
That's
Sudan,
it.
Somalia. And so my networking branch is just not just African American.
That's right.
You see what I'm talking about? So
That's right.
I far reach beyond that, right? Because when I told Walter when I was down to $27, it was those guys you talking about gave me the seed money so I can get back on my feet, right? So in turn, that was a healthy relationship. So
Wow.
I'm helping them with their business, business part of it, and getting clients and stuff. And at the same time, they helping me, right? And so now they realize this, and they realizing that is that we in this thing together, right? And so the big thing is that they want us to fight over crumbs and stuff. This,
They do.
right? We don't want to fight over crumbs no more.
Right.
I want the whole loaf.
Right.
That's right.
You
That's
see what I'm
right.
talking about? I want the whole thing.
That's
whole
right.
loaf.
And I tell people my big thing that we all can eat. You know what I'm talking about?
It's enough out here.
Yeah.
We
all
can all
crumbs.
eat.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? We
That's
can
it.
all
Yeah.
eat. Time of that fights and all that stuff is over. We
Yeah.
can all
Hopefully they do that in St. Paul, because I can remember when they were that mentality was up there. When I was up there,
Well, it's growing. There's shifts.
there's more
going on.
unity up there.
There's shifts going on because they have to.
Yes.
And I told a room full of black professionals, all older than me, that because of how I've traveled and where I've gone, that I am sure that in the next 2 or 3 years, if black communities do not shift dramatically,
Oh, no.
then we're gonna have a worse Holocaust than the Jews.
Just be outside looking in, no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's because things are moving at a pace that much of change management doesn't happen fast enough for communities of color.
Yeah.
I mean, some of us are just getting broadband.
Yeah.
And now they're going off to artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
It's we're
Dude is just cleaning it up.
we're way behind. And to be honest with you, I'm hoping that God gives Barbershop Talk and stuff like this a national stage to be able to speak to power. Because I'm not afraid to speak
Right.
to power, to LeBron, to people who have millions upon millions upon millions of dollars.
Yeah, you're right.
Who are part of a puppet system,
Yes.
Right.
who are perpetuating that
Yes.
puppet,
Yes.
Right.
who are not coming together.
Yeah.
And that's another elephant in the room. Crockett giving the athletic, oh man, gotta be careful here. And I'm not a billionaire, a millionaire, although I can play like a athlete. What's up, bro?
Play the role, right? Play that
Why
role.
don't a lot of these athletes get together? You get paid $250 million. I get paid $250 million. Yeah, you got your $10 million. Let's get together and
Because
revitalize the Black community.
they are making, I'll tell you exactly why. The money they are making owns them, they don't own it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like a
That's a good
record
answer.
label. They can't just say, okay, look.
They can't.
No.
So when they're signing those contracts, they're signing more, that 124.5 million, whatever it is, over 10 years, there's something more to it.
Mm-hmm.
That contract is almost like selling your soul.
How
Because
does
if
it make
you
your
cannot
language then?
command, well, if you can't, it's just like the music industry used to be.
Right.
Yes.
They were called control composition clauses.
That
So
makes
when you
sense.
signed, you remember back in the day when you were a musician and you signed, they owned you
Yes.
for as long as you were on that label.
Certain things you
And
couldn't do.
and they still,
Yeah.
and you couldn't make money.
Yeah, certain
You
things
could be
you
you could be putting platinum albums
Yeah.
out
Yeah,
and getting
you right.
$50,000 over 12-month period.
Yeah.
And it's no different with athletes. Unless they get endorsements, unless they have a management or oversight an agency
Right.
that's not a part of a system, they are owned.
Ah.
And that's why they don't just come together and put their money together. It's deep.
Wow.
It's really deep. And
See, I mean, he goes bankrupt so fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I stopped telling kids. I know the new thing now is that because it's job shortage, skilled
Yeah.
workers. I stopped telling kids, I don't want you to go to trade. I know everybody tell them that. I want you to go to trade. You know what? I want you to be an entrepreneur.
There you go.
I want you to begin because they think different.
Mm-hmm.
See, you talk about people
They
understand.
do.
Entrepreneurs think different.
Mhm.
You see what I'm talking about? They think totally different.
They do.
And because the more you can get them to own stuff, people listen to you.
yeah.
That's
See what I'm talking about? The reason why, see, we was always entrepreneurs, innovators,
Always.
because we had to be,
Always.
right? And so when they built the welfare system, it was for whites at first,
You gotta get college and get a job.
right?
That's what
They
they
built the
tell you.
welfare system. We start being dependent.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm talking about? And they got you once you start being dependent,
Right.
right? It's nothing like independence,
Mm-hmm.
right? As long as you still being dependent, you still a slave.
Ooh, boy, y'all getting it.
He hitting it this
So
time.
you still a
Merry
slave,
Christmas.
right? Because check this out. You can be half D and you still gotta go to work.
Right.
Yeah, that's bondage.
On time.
Yeah.
You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You see what I'm talking about?
You better be tardy.
You
You
see
better
what I'm
not
talking
be
about? You're talking, true freedom is you're managing your free time.
Right.
That's free. That's freedom. When you know how to manage yourself and manage time, that's freedom,
And that's wealth.
right?
Right.
And
That's the real
what it is,
wealth.
right?
That's
true.
wealth.
That's
Real
wealth.
wealth. Yeah,
You
that's
see-
right.
you see what I'm talking about? So I stopped telling kids, okay, forget it. They think all you can do is play basketball, play football. Time out saying you want to play on the team. Tell me you want to own
Own
your
the team.
franchise.
That's right.
Yeah. Yep,
Right?
Yep.
Right? So at the end of the day, my knees ain't hurt. My joints and stuff not hurt. I can't get old enough to enjoy it. But I tell you what, I want to own a franchise so I can play rec ball.
Yeah.
You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Time out for that. So we don't tell kids, and they don't see it, that they can own their own franchise and stuff like that. You know, people was talking about Lavelle Ball. You know what I'm talking about? Oh man, he's crazy. He doesn't. What he's trying to do? You know, I ain't black people. I said, what are you talking about? He did something where the threat was that Nike, Under Armour, Adidas, and Puma, and all of them was nervous because he did something outside the norm.
Right.
Because if this works, I don't no longer have to depend
On all
on
these
you
athletes.
on that,
That's
right?
right.
So now you got your own, right? And that one athlete, right? All the influence that he has, he can start his own brand,
Oh, yeah.
right? He's the brand. As long as he don't understand, he's the brand, right? And they capitalizing off of his brand.
Yes.
And for a long time, they capitalized off of our brand, our clothes, right? Everything
Shoes,
else. But if we know how,
yeah.
if we learn how to market ourselves, huh? So you understand? If you know how to market yourself, you're valuable.
Yeah.
Right?
True.
We value. We has always been, but nobody ever taught us that we're valuable. And we don't understand it. So what Walter was saying, we always play victimization or victimize, right?
Yeah.
I didn't understand. I went to, and I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna talk a lot. I remember I had this black lady. She was over grant money, right? She was over this grant money, and I didn't expect her to give me money because I was black. I expect her to open up opportunities because she's in that position, right? And off of what I have accomplished and done, give me an opportunity, right? And I'm sitting across from her, very intelligent, and I already know because I'm doing my homework that she done gave certain organizations piece of the pie, and they work with the same demographic I'm working with. And she looked at me and she said to me, and I will never forget this. She said, "This is a matter with black people. They're always coming with their hand." Right? And I thought to myself, I know you didn't tell the counterparts that.
Right.
Why would you say that to me? So that was about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever. And just recently, I think about a month ago, that stuck with me. Right? And it came back to me and said, she said to me, "Why do you always come with your hand out?" Right? And I thought to myself, why do I come with my hand out? Right? Instead of me coming with my hand out, I'm coming to you and saying, right, what I have, you should pay me for it. Right? Coming from a different perspective. And that changes everything now. So when I come into the room, I'm expecting you're going to pay me because of my skill set.
Your vision.
Right? So I'm not coming like this. I'm saying you're going to pay me because I have a skill set. So if you're going to meet with me, you got to guarantee to give me some money even before I go and meet. If you're not going to pay me for meeting with you, then we're not meeting. You sometimes it's a totally different skill set that you have, right? And I had to learn now how to make money outside of your norm. Sometimes outside of norm. So if you never give me a grant no more, don't make a difference anymore. Right? It don't make a difference anymore. So it's time for us to say, you know what? We don't want handouts. No, you're gonna pay us towards our skill set.
That's right.
Right? And that's what we gotta do. I know Walter got to get out of here, but y'all can
preaching now, he preaching the sermon.
But you know Walter can sing. My heart desires I can sing like Walter and Donovan. Donovan got that deep bass, that Barry White going on. I know you be pulling them girls, boy.
That baritone.
The baritone, Bud be hitting it too.
Bud is the man.
Cut it out. Cut it out, yo.
And then, but he is a musician. He do a whole lot. He got different streams of revenue and stuff. I learned a lot from Walter. We want to give Walter the last word unless you got anything.
Well, no. Walter, hit us up, man, before Christmas.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Don't laugh at me, y'all. Now, I just heard, all these years, where the word nigger came from. Now, it makes sense. They said that it actually came from people getting burnt around here from Nigeria. And once they got here, the word Nigeria was said wrong, and it became a word nigger. And you know what I'm saying? They just took that word and used it from the word Nigeria. I was like, wow. You know what I'm saying?
Identity.
Yeah, a little history in it. I just thought I'll throw
that's good
So you're looking deep over there.
He done opened up a whole nother book of worms. A whole nother book of worms. That's a whole nother hour right there.
Walter, another hour. Send us off to Christmas, my brother.
To the audience that's participated today, I just want to thank you for listening in. I appreciate Brother Donovan and Andre, and I told Andre I think this is one of the most important things that could emerge out of this community right now, and my prayer is that it gets elevated. that this takes a course and direction that begins to give our people their voice back. I'll say one thing that I think affected me. 2018, I did not realize that we were coming up on 50 years of a lot of things that are historic to our people. The poverty campaign that Martin Luther King was a part of in '63 culminated just recently in 2018, and the Poor People's Campaign. And I was scheduled to go on TPT Almanac April 6th of this year. I actually was on TPT talking about the land bridge, and I was thinking we were trying to prepare ourselves for the interview, and I never forget, I pulled into the parking lot, and someone sent me a correspondence talking about the Poor People's Campaign. I pulled it up on my email, and I was reading it, and I thought, what is the difference between the setting and the backdrop behind Martin Luther King's work in '63 through '68 and now? What's the difference? And the difference is that Martin Luther King helped a people to focus on the importance of their voice. Now, in 2018, we can all use our voice, but now we have to focus on the importance of what we're saying.
That's right.
Dang.
And so we've graduated 50 years later to everybody being able to say something. But nobody knowing what to say.
Exactly.
And I feel like Barbershop Talk and what this is going to become is to help shape our community's voice around what we're supposed to be saying. How we can be supportive of each other, because I want to lift you up. I want to lift you. I don't want to compete with you. I'm not going to go start a Barbershop Talk. And that's what our community does. Instead of supporting what works, what is valuable, what is proven, we go try to start our own thing. And if you live in Rochester or anywhere near Rochester in the 11 counties, southeast Minnesota, I don't know if you guys are going to start taking donations or getting sponsors.
Eventually we're gonna,
but I'm going to be the first to support this with my money, and I suggest that you do the same, so this voice can be elevated in 2019. That's all I want to say.
Amen.
All right. Hey, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, everybody. Barbershop Talk. See you in 2019. See you later.